Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for your testimony. You know, I don't object to having a hearing in any one of these areas here, and I think we all understand that there is a tension, natural tension, between a consumer and a producer, between a person working in the job and the boss, on all of that around safety concerns, whatever. So we ought to have these hearings to make sure whatever rules are out there are fair, they are being enforced fairly, they make sense. And so any one of these subjects would be a pretty good hearing in and of themselves. What I sort of do object to, Mr. Chairman, is that we got a spray of 6 people in 6 different industries. Everybody gets about 5 minutes to sort of delve down a little bit, and you don't get any counter-arguments because we've got about a 5-to-1 ratio here of perspective. And I think what would be healthy is take any one of these subjects and bring on a much more even balance of people so we get the full array of opinion here and perspective and see whether or not there is something wrong with a given rule on that. I don't think anybody here thinks that we should have unfair things. I've been in business for over 20 years, represented a ton of businesses, spent a lot of my life arguing about rules and regulations on that. Yet I think there should be rules and regulations. I would bet that everybody on this panel thinks that there ought to be some standards. In fact, 3 national business organizations took a poll recently, and the top problem with the economy right now, in their perspective anyway, isn't rules and regulations. Those are things that constantly aggravate people and have to deal with it. But their problem is a lack of demand. If I go around my community and say, what's wrong, I say, I don't have any customers. People are out of work, they don't have the money to spend, they don't have any customers. 78% of small business people think that government standards are important to level the playing field between their business and big business. 86% think they are a necessary part of a modern economy. 84% say they support food safety standards. And you talk to any group of people out in my neighborhood, talk to mothers and fathers around the playground, everything like that, they are worried about what kind of food is being imported and not checked. They are worried about toys coming in and not being checked. Those are legitimate standards on that. They are worried about clean air and clean water. I grew up in Salem. We used to have the North River run right down the center of Salem. It was purple and blue and green and noxious, and we lived over a half a mile away. We couldn't sit on our deck. I think it was a good idea to get some standards to clean that up. And now Salem's a vibrant community. You don't smell any of that stuff going down there. People are boating and enjoying the water. So the issue, I think, here is not that we shouldn't have hearings on that to make sure the rules and regulations are effective. It's this notion of putting it under an umbrella that regulations are killing our economy or they are killing our job creators or whatever. It's just total nonsense. I don't think there is an iota of evidence that we have either heard today or that exists out there for this larger notion. I mean, we have sat in here in this Congress on that theory and talked about mercury emissions from power plants as somehow being job killers. We are talking about a 1990 bipartisan amendment to legislation, the Clean Air Act, that ordered, the bipartisan legislation ordered the EPA to set standards. 17 states adopted it on their own. There is 772 million pounds of airborne toxics out there. I would think that none of these witnesses want to be sucking in at 2.5 pounds per person on that basis. 20 years it took for the EPA to get to dealing with that issue. And even when it gets passed, it hasn't passed yet, it's going to take 4 more years, give 4 more years for people to get ready to implement it. It's, 31,000 construction jobs will be created, 9,000 continuing jobs in the utility industry, and yet we are arguing like it benefits at 25 times the cost of that in terms of health, and 160,000 lives will be saved. What are we arguing about in terms of that? We have hearings on that instead of the things that these gentlemen bring to the table. We limit toxic emissions from a variety of cement on that, as if the cement thing is going to pack up and go to China if it doesn't get its way on this basis. But, those are chemical compounds that do contribute to smog and pollution. And for every dollar we put in on enforcing that rule to clean those up, we get about $19 back in a public health benefit. We are talking about the import of illegally harvested endangered wood for guitars. This is what we spend our time on, not with the building industry, which has some serious concerns on that, not whether the LEED is the good example or whether we have other standards that should be brought in and why, not on the banking industry, what is happening to our community banks versus people on Wall Street that basically brought this country and almost the international community to their knees. That's not what we are talking about. We are talking about guitars, which incidentally made $1 billion under the so-called onerous restriction of not letting them bring in illegal imported wood. We talk about, we had a hearing here on invasive foreign snakes. Now, there's something really slowing down the community. The evidence was one person in Utah who said in 2010 he had to lay off 4 of his 7 employees, in 2008 rather. Of course, 2008 was the height of the recession, and the rule he was complaining about didn't get put in until 2010. but this we had a hearing on. So it's not the fact that we shouldn't have these hearings. This is what this committee should be doing, and all of these are legitimate concerns. We can come down on one side or the other, but we ought to have a full hearing on those that we think are important enough to impact the economy so that it takes Congress's attention. Not the nitpicking stuff that are left to lawyers and experts that are going to go in front of the rules agencies and argue whether or not it should be amended or changed one way or the other, but the ones that make substantial public policy that really do make a difference, and then have a full hearing on all of that with enough perspective in there that we can all get a reasonable decision made as to what's good and what's bad. Really, I think the problem with the majority here is when they acknowledge that that's not really the problem, that the problem is a lack of demand and a lack of customers, then they're going to have to put some attention on the American Jobs Act and get people back to work, in excess of 1.9 million people back to work in a very short relative order on that. And that's their problem. So they have to look for something else to rail about and have to entitle hearings like this with a broad notion that, it's a job killers and job creators and that stuff. Let's do our job. Let's have a hearing on each of these things that are important in their own respect and in their industries that maybe do impact the economy, not bring in a show of 6 people, give them barely any time to make their case or have anybody rebut it so that they can get deeper into the weeds, and we can do our job in that way. And with that, I
thank the gentleman. His time has expired, and a good history lesson. But